Welcome to A Course in Miracles, where you'll discover health and well-being through inner peace. Your host is Eloisa Ramos, EFT master and author of Beyond Self-Esteem, Discovering Your Boundless Self-Worth. Using EFT, the Ramos clearing technique, and the principles of A Course in Miracles, you'll learn how to open your mind to healing and to all that is inherently yours: deep fulfillment, vitality, joy, and inner peace.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's program. Today we are exploring two very important questions. What is death and what is fear? And we're going to be using the guidance found in lessons 159 through 172 of A Course in Miracles. There's a lot to be covered here. And today what we are seeking to understand is the world of perception, where fear and death seem real and physicality undeniable. We want to learn to see it differently and open our mind to the truth. So let's begin. I'd like to review a bit so we can all be on the same page when we try to understand the lessons, and in particular, Lesson 163, which says, "There is no death, the Son of God is free," and Lesson 167, "There is one life, and that I share with God." So I want to give you an overview of what A Course in Miracles is basically teaching. When we examine our thoughts, what we find are two fundamentally different sets of thoughts, and they're interconnected within each set, and they support each other. A Course in Miracles refers to these sets as systems. It's showing us how we listen and take direction or guidance from these thought systems, and in effect, we live by them. However, these two thought systems have no common ground at all, and the perspective they give us of the world and what we are is completely contradictory to each other. Belief in one system negates the other. When we identify with one thought system, our mind's perception is unable to see or access the thoughts of the other because we are believing the one we identify with is real and true, and therefore the other has no significance and can't be true. It's as if it's not there. The worlds that we see through the eyes of each of these thought systems is completely different from one another. And for now, we can say they are opposites. Okay, so one of those thought systems is labeled the ego thought system. And its foundational ideas are fear, death, and separation. Our identity, as perceived through this thought system, is one of body and or ego, which is a self-made image that we identify with. A Course in Miracles calls these self-made identities idols because they're labels and judgments of how we see ourselves. However, when we identify with them, we can't see that we are the ones making the labels up. We think and believe that the label somehow makes us into that which the label describes, as if changing the label on a file folder with content automatically changed the content to match the different label. The world we see through the eyes of the ego thought system appears to be outside of us, and so the world becomes a canvas on which our thought system is reflected. The world becomes a mirror, reflecting our beliefs and thinking. So, what do we perceive in the world made from our belief in the ego thought system? We see people in bodies and things that are physically separated and that are subject to deterioration and death in time. We see individual differences, we see strangers and friends, and no two people with the exact same interest, making mistrust, fear, and conflict inevitable at some point. Here, we are on our own, and defenses and competition are necessary to ensure safety and to get our share of limited resources, which are needed to ensure survival. When we give something, we lose it. And so we can run out of anything. Even intangibles like love can be wasted or exhausted by giving. This is what we have come to know as life or reality, a world of impermanence and change. There's nothing you can count on except death, because we trust that what our eyes are showing us is true and real. We put our faith and depend on our physical senses to show us such reality, believing it is truth with a TH. The second thought system has a foundation of love, unity, or oneness. What we see reflected in this world is defenses are unnecessary because opposition and conflict are not applicable, since all life shares in spirit and is not separate from its source and from one another. There is no one that is, quote, other, unquote, or separate from me, and therefore no threat or fear is possible because there are no individual parts that can conflict. What I give, in effect, I give to myself, and so there is no loss. It is a thought system that reflects back to us a world of abundance, eternal life, spirit, or energy, where everything is fundamentally life force, and therefore one. Here, we don't identify with body or ego, but with spirit. And the real world is not what our physical senses show us, but beyond what our eyes can see. This is called Christ's vision, and Lesson 160 explains. His vision sees no strangers, but beholds his own and joyously unites with them. Who sees a brother as a body, sees him as fear's symbol. This do the body's eyes behold in one whom heaven cherishes, the angels love, and God created perfect. This is his reality, and in Christ's vision is his loveliness reflected in a form so holy and so beautiful that could scarce refrain from kneeling at his feet. So the central difference between these two thought systems lies in what we want to believe we are. Am I, as God or Source created me, whole and perfect, and therefore not separate and innocent and holy like my Source? Or am I self-created and therefore the giver of my own value, identity, and life, separate and different from other life forms, with an individual mind and will, and guilty of attack? Which of these do you want to believe you are? Our answer will determine to which thought system we open our mind to, give allegiance to, and which we will protect from change because we have identified with it. Okay, keep in mind that both thought systems form a world of perception, which is subjective. When we identify with our beliefs, we are projecting, and our perception is basically just reflecting back what those beliefs are saying. Chapter 3, Section 3 in the text says, quote, "You can see in many ways because perception involves interpretation, and this means it is not whole or consistent. Section 4 says, quote, perception always involves some misuse of mind because it brings the mind into areas of uncertainty. When it chooses to be separated, it chooses to perceive. Afterwards, it can only choose ambiguously, and the only way out of ambiguity is clear perception. The mind returns to its proper function when it wills to know. This places it in the service of spirit, where perception is changed. So the truth of what we are, which is knowledge, is beyond our beliefs and perception, because truth involves no interpretation and is therefore consistent and certain. We can understand why A Course in Miracles calls the world of perception a dream or illusion and uses the term, quote, mind asleep, unquote, in Lesson 167, when mind believes that something contrary to truth is real. Beyond the two thought systems is knowledge and truth, and this is what A Course in Miracles calls reality. So what we are learning is that truth is the only thing that is real. And it can get a little confusing when you study A Course in Miracles because we are used to calling reality the world that we see through the perception of our ego thought system. And the Course in Miracles is using reality to mean the reality of absolute universal truth, basically God. A Course in Miracles is summarized in the preface of the book under the section, what it says, like this, quote, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. This is how A Course in Miracles begins. It makes a fundamental distinction between the real and the unreal, between knowledge and perception. Knowledge is truth under one law, the law of love or God. Truth is unalterable, eternal, and unambiguous. It can be unrecognized, but it cannot be changed. It applies to everything that God created, and only what He created is real. It is beyond learning because it is beyond time and process. It has no opposites, no beginning, and no end. It merely is. So, perception is variable because it involves interpretation, and our interpretations are formed by what we have learned in the past, our experiences, judgments, beliefs, and definitions. In short, it's our thinking. What can get confusing is that we have come to see our perceptions as truth, with a TH as absolute and universal. And so A Course in Miracles tries to help us see that the ego perception is not showing us truth. It's not showing us reality, though that is what we are familiar with and call reality. A Course in Miracles refers to the ego thought system world we perceive as a misperception, a miscreation, or illusion. On the other hand, the thought system based on love and oneness, which is considered to be in alignment with higher knowledge and truth, it calls that clear perception or true perception. And the world that we see through it, the real world. And this real world can only be seen with what A Course in Miracles calls Christ vision. And these chapters go into quite a bit of detail around Christ's vision. Forgiveness, of course, is the key in Christ's vision, and in allowing us to see a world of innocence, unity, without sin or attack. Chapter 3 of the text says, quote, "Perception is temporary. As an attribute of the belief in space and time, it is subject to either fear or love. Misperception produces fear, and true perception fosters love." This is one way you can distinguish which of your thoughts are coming from which thought system. Okay? Those that produce fear are going to be part of the ego thought system, and those that foster love or unity are going to be coming from the thought system of love. But neither, I'm going to continue from chapter 3, but neither brings certainty, because all perception varies. That's why it is not knowledge. True perception is the basis for knowledge, but knowing is the affirmation of truth and beyond all perceptions. So knowing or knowledge is direct communication from Source or God, and it bypasses our perceptual mind. The ego thought system rests on the belief that we are a body and that our personal identity is self-made, that our identity or mind can be whatever we wish it to be or make it. This is called ego. We then see ourselves as born without inherent value or identity, a blank slate to write on, and the thoughts and beliefs that are written there throughout our lifetime, which we call knowledge, though it has no certainty, is the unstable ground on which we place our identity. Let's see. And here's some more from chapter 3. Quote, "The ability to perceive made the body possible, because you must perceive something and with something. That is why perception involves an exchange or a translation, which knowledge does not need. The interpretive function of perception, a distorted form of creation, then permits you to interpret the body as yourself in an attempt to escape from the conflict you have induced. Spirit, which knows, could not be reconciled with the loss of power, because it is incapable of darkness." And we talked a little bit about the idea of what happens when we perceive ourselves and identify ourselves as a body. When the mind does that, it loses power because it can no longer recognize its connection to Spirit or to Source. And we talked about that, 2 weeks ago. The world made by the ego thought system begins to fade as we receive Christ's vision. Lesson 159 says, quote, "Christ's vision is the bridge between the worlds, and in its power can you safely trust to carry you from this world into one made holy by forgiveness. Things which seem quite solid here are merely shadows there, transparent, faintly seen, at times forgot, and never able to obscure the light that shines beyond them. Holiness has been restored to vision, and the blind can see." So this is the aim of A Course in Miracles, to help us receive the gifts of God. Lesson 166 says, quote, "I am entrusted with the gifts of God." And these gifts, like vision and grace, are all available to us. Lesson 169 says, Quote, grace is an aspect of the love of God which is most like the state prevailing in the unity of truth. It is the world's most lofty aspiration, for it leads beyond the world entirely. The goal of this course, grace is not the goal this course aspires to attain. Yet, we prepare for grace in that an open mind can hear the call to waken. It is not shut tight against God's voice. It has become aware that there are things it does not know, and thus is ready to accept a state completely different from experience with which it is familiarly at home. However, we cannot be forced to receive these gifts. Lesson 166 says, quote, all things are given you. He gives without exception, holding nothing back that can contribute to your happiness. And yet, unless your will is one with his gifts are not received. Here is the paradox that underlies the making of the world. And we're talking about the ego world. This world is not the will of God, and so it is not real. Yet, those who think it real must still believe there is another will, and one that leads to opposite effects from those he, with a capital H, wills. Impossible indeed, but every mind that looks upon the world and judges it as certain, solid, trustworthy, and true, believes in two creators, or in one, himself alone, but not in one God. The gifts of God are not acceptable to anyone who holds such strange beliefs, unquote. So as long as we perceive ourselves as separate and with an independent will, Lesson 166 continues, quote, he must deny their presence, God's gifts' presence, contradict the truth, and suffer to preserve the world he made. Still, he wanders on in misery and poverty, alone though God is with him. He seems a sorry figure, weary, worn, and threadbare clothing, and with feet that bleed a little from the rocky road he walks. Yet is he really tragic when you see that he is following the way he chose, and need but realize who walks with him, and open up his treasures to be free. This is the chosen self, the one you made as a replacement for reality. This is the self you savagely defend against all reason, every evidence, and all the witnesses with proof to show this is not you. Your ancient fear has come upon you now. Christ's hand has touched your shoulder, and you feel that you're not alone. You even think the miserable self you thought was you may not be your identity. Perhaps God's word is truer than your own. Perhaps his gifts to you are real. Perhaps he has not wholly been outwitted by your plan to keep his son in deep oblivion and go the way you chose without yourself, with a capital S. Now do we live, for now we cannot die. The wish for death is answered, and the sight that looked upon it now has been replaced by vision, which perceives that you are not what you pretend to be, unquote. And there's a lot there, but it's basically just saying that when we perceive ourselves as separate and with an independent will, we are going to feel as if we are alone in this world. And we are going to be experiencing a lot of difficulties and struggles and pain and suffering when we don't need to, because we are not, in fact, separate and alone. God is next to us. Christ's hand has touched our shoulder. And so this brings us to lesson 167. In this world, there appears to be a state that is life's opposite. You call it death. When we believe that death can oppose or annihilate life, what we are saying is that life is not eternal. And whatever we believe life is going to be weaker than death. Because anything that can oppose will have to be stronger. So for most of us here, what we are equating life with is the body. We're not distinguishing between the body and the awareness, consciousness, life energy that communicates through the body. It's like confusing the television set with a transmission and electricity that gives us the information and power to show through. We can say the TV is dead because it doesn't turn on because we haven't plugged it into the power source, or if it breaks and the components that transmit the power and the transmission of information can't put the signal through. But neither the power nor the transmission has been lost or annihilated. The receiver has stopped receiving. That's all. So it is with the body. However, if you identify with the body and call it life, you will have to believe that you are separate from the power and the transmission source. And when the body breaks down and can't transmit that power and signal, you will believe you die. Lesson 167 says, you think that death is of the body, yet it is but an idea, irrelevant to what is seen as physical. A thought is in the mind. It can be applied as mind directs it, but its origin is where it must be changed if change occurs. Ideas leave not their source. It is the reason you can heal. It is the cause of healing. It is why you cannot die. Its truth establishes you as one with God. And this is very important, the idea that ideas leave not their source. And so I'm going to do my best to give you some examples to try to clarify that. I work with a client who was suppressing most of his feelings. We looked at a memory when he was feeling good, before he had blocked off his emotions. He was about 5 years old and had just won a competition and was given a trophy. So I asked him, where is that good feeling in your body? And he said, it's in my chest. Okay, I said, where do you think that feeling came from? Is it yours? He said, it's not mine. I said, okay, so where did your good feeling come from if it's not yours? He said, the trophy. So I asked him, well, trophies are not made out of flesh and bones. Do they have feelings to give? He saw that his feeling could not have come from the trophy directly. He believed, though, that people give each other good feelings. I said, but that good feeling is showing up inside your body. So how is it that someone else could put it there? Does your skin absorb that feeling or something to get it in there from outside of you? And so, of course, he recognized, no, that doesn't happen. But the point here, and what I wanted him to see, is that the feeling had come from his mind, from past learning, where he saw winners celebrating and smiling, and the idea that says something like, if you're a winner, you are special and you can feel good about yourself. Okay, maybe you feel pride. So, ideas do not leave the mind which thinks them. Our feelings come from our thoughts. They are effects of the particular thoughts we are having. That's why if we can change our thinking, we can change how we feel. So this is seen very clearly when we do EFT tapping and we release the emotions and then the thoughts and our perspectives shift. It is why we can heal, because the cause of sickness is in our sick thoughts. Okay? That's what the Course in Miracles teaches. That's where the cause of sickness is. And so, those thoughts generate what a Course in Miracles terms the only problem there is: separation. Of course, when we're upset, others can see we're upset. Okay, they can see we're being affected. All right, and they notice our emotional reactions, and they can. Okay, but it's still our ideas and the effects that they're having on us that are doing this to us. It's not like those ideas and feelings can jump out of our skin and enter another person's body to give them the same feelings. If the other person accepts our ideas or interpretations as true, that interpretation will then be theirs too. And the effects that come from that perspective will then be experienced by them. So if I accept the ego thought idea into my mind as true, I will then give myself those effects. Everyone is responsible for their own feelings because ideas leave not their source. We are stuck with the effects of our thoughts or ideas. It doesn't matter that we blame someone else for hurting us. The anger and the hatred we feel towards them, which is coming from our interpretation and blame, is not jumping out of our skin and physically going to attack them. The effects of the upset that we feel is only affecting us. Granted, others can have their own reaction to our reaction, but it will be their own ideas or interpretation of our reaction that will produce their reaction. So we cannot force anyone to believe or feel a particular way if they don't see things the same way we do. Ideas cannot leave their source. Okay, lesson 167 continues. Quote, death is the thought that you are separate from your Creator. It is the belief conditions change, emotions alternate because of causes you cannot control, you did not make, and you can never change. It is a fixed belief ideas can leave their source and take on qualities the source does not contain, becoming different from their origin, apart from it in kind as well as distance, time, and form. So, a thought will generate a feeling or an effect that is in like vibration. A happy thought cannot generate sadness. An apple seed cannot generate a peach tree. A fearful thought will generate fear. A forgiving thought will generate a sense of unity. The effect cannot be different from the cause because it is not separate. Okay? We will be like our source, whatever we want to believe that is. We cannot be different. Okay? Death is the thought that we are separate from our Creator or life. It means that we can be cut off from that which is the source of the life we have. If that were true, then ideas could leave their source and be able to be different. So a thought of doing something exciting could jump over to my friend, and now she has it, and I cannot have it because it's separate from me and I just gave it to her. In computer terms, we could cut and paste ideas and feelings onto each other. And on top of that, the idea itself would have the ability to change itself and be different from that which I cut. So, if I planted a lemon seed, I would have no idea what type of plant I would get because it would be separate and different from its source. Okay? So hopefully that helped to illustrate what they were saying there in Lesson 167. So let me illustrate further for you. I worked with a client who had a very strong core belief that he was not good enough. We came to a memory of an event when he was 4 years old. The pest exterminators came to her house, and she asked her father, "Why are they here?" Her father said, "They're here to exterminate pests like you." She started crying. The father explained it was a joke, but she had believed that because her father had said it, it had to be true, and that in fact, she must be a pest to people, and took it on as an identity. She said, "Nobody wants me around." She was believing that someone's idea of her, which can be a label, opinion, a judgment, had magical powers to jump out and change what she was, making her into a pest, much like a prince gets turned into a frog. In other words, she was believing that her father's perception of her, could affect her and change her reality without her control. Now, we may want to believe that our judgments and labels have such power over others, but they don't. All we do is change our perception of how we are seeing someone. The reality of someone's true self does not change. The judgment or idea does not exist outside of the mind that's doing the judging. However, if the other person accepts or believes what is said about them, because they must agree that it's true at some level, then they will be perceiving themselves that way and are now generating the same self-image for themselves. The idea did not leave anyone's mind. If we don't accept or believe the idea, it's not ours, it's not available to our mind, and it has no effect on us. The point is that what we are has already been established because we are already created and live. The essence of life is in us because we are alive. That is what is keeping us alive. It has nothing to do with what we think we are and how our perception perceives us. In other words, the content of the file called life can be given many labels or left without a label. That does not change or affect the content of the file. It can be mislabeled, but once the content is established, no labeling or belief can change it. This is why the idea that thoughts leave not their source establishes us as one with source. We cannot say we are alive and not be sharing in life. Life is that which creates and expands, and it can transmit through many forms or channels, but it never ends. Just because the channel gets blocked, just like the TV, broken TV, and can't function in the transmission of life, does not mean life has died. The creative power that uses mind to create remains. Okay, lesson 167 continues. For mind creates all things that are, and cannot give them attributes it lacks, nor change its own internal mindful state. It cannot make the physical. What seems to die is but the sign of mind asleep, unquote. So, because the physical is limited, separate, and not eternal, it cannot be a creation of God, since it is not in its likeness, eternal, universal, etc. But here is our physical body anyway. So, A Course in Miracles teaches that our mind made the body, not God. And now it says mind cannot really make the body because it cannot give it attributes it does not have. So the lessons takes our learning in steps. First, we need to accept that God did not create the body in order to accept responsibility for what our ego thought system is making perceptually. That's why Lesson 166 says, quote, "This world is not the will of God, and so it is not real," unquote. This physical world is a miscreation because when the mind believes it is separate from its source and not as God created it, but rather impermanent and guilty and bad, it miscreates with thoughts that are unlike its creator, because it is the beliefs and the thinking that are doing the manifesting in our life. So, an ego thought system of beliefs based on fear will generate a world that God did not create because it is unlike love. And since nothing other than what God creates is real, our mind cannot be creating a world of death and separation, because in truth, our mind is not separate or unlike its source. So, A Course in Miracles teaches us that our mind is simply asleep, believing that it can be separate from its source, and the world it generates is a dream or illusion. The ego thought system is mind dreaming it can be something it is not. The other way that the Course in Miracles puts it is it's dreaming that the impossible is possible. Lesson 167 continues, quote, "Death cannot come from life. Ideas remain united to their source. They can extend all that their source contains. As they are made, so will their making be. The mind can think it sleeps, but that is all. It cannot change what is its waking state. It cannot make a body nor abide within a body. What is alien to the mind does not exist because it has no source. The opposite of life can only be another form of life. As such, it can be reconciled with what created it, because it is not opposite in truth." Okay, so here it gives us another twist, and it takes our learning further, because what it's saying is that even the dream, which we said was unlike God, cannot be unlike God, because nothing can actually exist that is unlike God. It won't be real. It may have a different form, which is physical, but it's not going to be opposite in truth, because nothing that is different or that can oppose God is real. If it was, God could not be God. If something could be different than God, and it would have to be separate in order for it to be different, only then could it oppose God. And then if it did, it would dethrone him because it would have to be more powerful than God. And unfortunately, for many of us, when we believe that death is real, we're not aware that we are actually believing all of these things too, because there's no way for our mind to reconcile the idea of death with the idea of eternal life. Let's see. A Course in Miracles teaches that this is what fear is. In Chapter 2 of the text it says, quote, all fear is ultimately reducible to the basic misperception that you have the ability to usurp the power of God. Of course, you neither can nor have you been able to do this. Here is the real basis for your escape from fear. So in truth, death is not real because it does not come from life, and only that which comes from life's source can be real. So we don't need to be afraid, because all these things that we perceive as being able to threaten or oppose God have no reality whatsoever. It's mind asleep, you could say. And so, let's see. Lesson 167 continues. Its form may change. It may appear to be what is not. Yet mind is mind, awake or sleeping. It is not its opposite in anything created, nor in what it seems to make when it believes it sleeps. So, even though we just said mind must be asleep and dreaming, it takes us a little further. It is only believing that it's sleeping. For not even in dreaming can there be an opposite to life. Okay, so this brings us back full circle. The idea that mind is asleep and can dream of what is different, separate, in opposition to truth, is only a belief in mind awake. So even the whole idea that the world is a dream and all of that is not real either. It is simply a belief in mind awake. Lesson 167 continues. God creates only mind awake. He does not sleep, and his creations cannot share what he gives not, nor make conditions which he does not share with them. The thought of death is not the opposite of thoughts of life. Forever unopposed by any kind, the thoughts of God remain forever changeless. Okay, so what he's saying here is that even though we're looking and we're saying there's two thought systems and they produce these two perceptions of two very different worlds, they're not really opposites, even though we said they were opposites, because in truth, nothing can oppose what is. And so it continues. Lesson 167 continues, and it says, when the mind elects to be what it is not, and to assume an alien power which it does not have, because it cannot usurp the power of God, a foreign state it cannot enter, which is the dream state, or a false condition not within its source, which is death, it merely seems to go asleep a while. Okay, it dreams of time, and an interval in which what seems to happen never has occurred. The changes wrought are substanceless, and all events are nowhere. When the mind awakens, it but continues as it always was. Okay, so the lessons kind of I admit that they're really a little bit difficult to follow, but we just stay with it, and we keep adding at it, and it begins to sink through, and we begin to understand it, and it comes. So here, God creates only mind awake, and therefore it only appears or seems to sleep. So when mind chooses to identify with thoughts that represent what it is not, which is the ego thought system, it seems to go to sleep and dream of time. Time, which is the past and the future, is also part of the dream, part of the illusion. And what appears to happen in time has never occurred in truth, because it takes place in the ego thought system only. The idea of time is a thought in the ego thought system. And since this thought system is not real, none of what happens really happens. And so all of those memories that are in our mind, they're perceptions. Okay, we want to believe that they are actual events that took place. Okay, they're memories of the perception, of the interpretation that our mind gave to what took place. Okay, it's not the actual event. The actual event is done and over with. It's simply the interpretation that we gave to that event, and that's why EFT. We can use EFT and go in there and release the interpretations and all of the anger and shame and guilt and fear that's associated with those interpretations. Release them, and then that memory completely changes. And not only does it change, but we release the we release all the judgment that's there, so that our perception is not blocked from seeing the truth of reality, which is completely loving. Lesson 167 continues, quote, "As we were, so are we now and will forever be. A sleeping mind must waken as it sees its own perfection, mirroring the Lord of life so perfectly it fades into what is reflected there. And now it is not more a mere reflection. It becomes the thing reflected, and the light which makes reflection possible. No vision now is needed, for the awakened mind is one that knows its source, its self, its holiness." Okay, and so this is describing that transition from perception to knowledge. And Course in Miracles says that is a step that is taken by God. And this brings us to Lesson 168. Quote, "Your grace is given me, I claim it now." And Lesson 169, "By grace I live, by grace I am released." Lesson 169 says, quote, "Grace is an aspect of the love of God which is most like the state prevailing in the unity of truth. It is the world's most lofty aspiration, for it leads beyond the world entirely. Grace is not the goal this course aspires to attain, yet we prepare for grace in that an open mind can hear the call to waken. It is not shut tight against God's voice. It has become aware that there are things it does not know, and thus is ready to accept a state completely different from experience with which is familiarly at home. Oneness is simply the idea God is. We say, quote, God is, unquote, and then we cease to speak. For in that knowledge, words are meaningless. There are no lips to speak them, and no parts of mind sufficiently distinct to feel that it is now aware of something, not itself. It has united with its source, and like its source itself, it merely is. And this is describing the release of the ego thought system, the transcendence of our ego, where it says that there are no parts of mind sufficiently distinct, because that's basically what the ego is. It's a way to see itself as separate and distinct, a separate identity from source. No part of mind sufficiently distinct to feel that it is now aware of something, not itself. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the program. Here I can only leave you with this reflection to finish up. We don't know how to be in this world without defenses because we perceive the impermanence of the things of this world and we see them as a threat. We can't depend on anything because nothing lasts forever. That which I get familiar with, comfortable with, and come to love and embrace gets torn away time and time again through loss and death. Though I can say I survived, I feel like I lost parts of me and am now broken in a shadow of my old self. And yet stand guard because all that happened in the past and which was fearful looms over my life with the threat. What if it happens again? As I am writing these exact words, I see I opened 2 Word document pages because my computer was so slow at the start. So I close one and find out I closed the one I had started writing on. And now I have to start all over because I didn't save it. And so it seems to be with this experience we call life. With each loss, it feels like we are set back and have to start over again. The cycle of beginning and end, birth and death, repeating itself over and over. I feel this resistance to letting go of the doubts that this day only offers me goodness and happiness, and that I don't need to guard and embrace. Embrace myself and expect the worst to make myself better prepared to handle what my fears imagine. I resist truth because I fear it is as I have imagined it to be in the past, fearful and the bringer of death, of loss, leaving me with nothing, with non-existence. I feel this resistance in my throat. It's my independent, separate will that can only know itself by opposing what is in the present moment and fearing it. To let that go would be to walk without defenses and protection in the world. I imagine that if I did that, I would feel naked and vulnerable, because others would see me just as I am, underneath all the pretense, allowing others to look at me without the need to hide, because I'm feeling vulnerable, expecting them to judge. Do I dare walk the world today without defenses, without fear, and trust everything is good, without needing to pass judgment on anyone or anything? What do I have to lose? I have not prevented loss or fear by listening to the voice of defense and protection, and I'm ready to trust truth. But truth is hard to believe, that God wills only my perfect happiness. After all, if something is too good to be true, it's not true. I have been willing to believe that expecting and believing in things that are too good will only make a fool out of me, and my pride needs to be protected. Better to believe that life offers me nothing too good than to risk hurting my pride. Fear ensures my safety. Oh, my ego safety, that is. When I walk the world in being, I can feel like I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve, because my heart is wide open to everyone and everything I meet, offering them only complete acceptance and welcome arms. I have believed this to be unsafe and have guarded my heart with walls, locks, and keys. But today, I walk like a child, completely open to what life brings, without preconceived ideas about what that is, about the harm or evil that might lurk in hidden corners. In complete trust of life, I walk this day, allowing it to carry me on this amazing journey of discovery, fully trusting its only good intentions and love. I walk in grace, for it is not me walking at all. I'm being carried by life, my Creator, experiencing itself in wondrous beauty and delight. I am love experiencing itself. This concludes our program today. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to review more of some of what we talked about, please read my book, Beyond Self-Esteem, Discovering Your Boundless Self-Worth. And I go into details on perception, and I have a chapter on truth and another one on identification. So until next time, blessings to everyone.